Thanks for joining us. Welcome to Live Free, Ride Free. I'm your host, Rupert Isaacson, New York Times bestselling author of The Horse Boy and The Long Ride Home. Before I jump in with today's guest, I want to say a huge thank you to you, our audience, for helping to make this happen. I have a request. If you like what we do here, please give it a thumbs up, like, subscribe, tell a friend. It really, really helps us to make the progress. To find out about our certification courses, online video libraries, books, and other courses, please go to rupertisaacson.com. So now let's jump in. Welcome back. I've got such a treat for you all. I've got the incredible Craig and the incredible George who've deigned to be back on, which amazes me because why should they when they've got so many other amazing things to do? So lucky us. All right, now Craig has just come back from somewhere close to God, physically. Let him tell us about that. And he's been teasing, I think, me and George with little snippets of where he's been the last couple of months. And we've been like, all right, Craig, just fucking tell us more. So he's going to tell us more. I'm going to hold a gun to his head. George, if he doesn't make animal sounds, will cry. So, and throw our toys out of the cot. But where we left the last conversation off with Craig, if you listeners remember, was we were getting towards the importance of journaling and also the importance of trying to do things in tribe and community when we're in nature, because that's what our species is. Solitude has its place, but it's not really fully who we are. And we also touched on the impact of the mind and the brain and the body of what does being in areas of high biodiversity mean? And, both Craig and George are lucky enough to live in such areas. The Cape Peninsula of Africa, Yellowstone National Park, and I'm here in the forests of Germany. So I want to kick off with Craig. Where have you been?
Yeah, thanks so much, Rupert. Great to be here with you, George.
I know you're not going to tell us, are you?
Perfect, Mum.
All right. Where's the place that you've been that you're not going to tell us?
So, yeah, very fortunate to have visited this research island, which is 3,000 miles off East Africa in the middle of the Indian Ocean. Very remote area of a whole lot of islands and atolls. And it is what we call a near pristine environment. So not much fishing has pressure there at all. And it's absolutely startling because literally everywhere you look, there's a shark fin, there's a ray, there's a manta ray fin coming up. There, just birds soaring everywhere. There's predations going on, huge fish in the shallows. You can see tuna snorkeling. It is large numbers of predators. And it's just, as I was saying, earlier, I live in an area, beautiful area here, the kelp forest, and there's a lot of life, a lot of animals. But this is at another level. And the sheer force of the biodiversity, the life force that's pumping through this place, does something to your being, to your mind, your body, your spirit that is hard to quantify. I mean, it's hot, way hotter than I'm used to. There are a lot of biting insects. You'd think it would deplete your energy, but it actually just gives you this incredible vital force. And it's fascinating. I could do, 2 or 3 times more physically than I can normally do. So it affects you in a deep way, and it affects your whole being. It's very, very hard to quantify. And what I can say, what struck me almost as amusing was, we do all these things to stay mentally healthy. Like, I do this breathing protocol, and I do, the cold work. I do, meditation, all this kind of stuff to try and keep sane.
Me too. Cheers.
In a place, I couldn't resist. In a place like this, I just stop all of that, and I feel just way better. And what it strikes me is that, all these things we try and do to keep sane is just purely all we're trying to do is get back to the state that our ancestors lived in, our design. That's all we're trying to do. We're just trying to feel human in the strange world that we've created for ourselves.
George, you live in one of the flagship biodiverse places. Oh look, Craig's got baboons walking on his head in his own office. Yellowstone National Park. Some people think of that tourism traffic jams. Some people think of that pre-Columbian, pre-Columbus American wilderness. Of course, it's both. And of course, it's very important that the crowds can go there, because without access, similar to where you live, Craig, False Bay in South Africa, people can go. People, surfers will go camp, get in there. People can go beachcomb, whatever. And this thing of access and the desire for access remains deep in us, even when we're urban and suburban. As you say, Craig, there's all these things that we do for mind, body, and soul are simply just trying to get back to what it feels like to live in the state we're sort of supposed to, as our species and the habitat we're supposed to be in, that we now basically no longer do live in and have lost almost lost the ancestral memory of. But luckily, it does still drive us there. So, George, before we hit record, you were talking about revisiting paths that are known. And I like that. I like the fact, like, I revisit Yellowstone sometimes, and I like the fact that there are certain drives. And an obvious one is the Lamar Valley, because one wants to go there and see wolves or big herds of bison or something. And every time you say the Lamar Valley, there's almost a little part of you goes, oh, how cliche, the Lamar Valley. So of course I'm going to go to the Lamar Valley, for the people that know Yellowstone. But of course, as soon as you go there, and it's just one road, it's the same road, you always drive it. It's never the same. It's never the same. The animal life that's going on, the wolves, the bears, the bison. You made this point about taking just hikes that are known hikes and then just revisiting in different ways, which I think is another way of hunting out this biodiversity that we need for our well-being. Talk to us about that. But before you do it, could you please make an animal sound that you might encounter along that? It's cool.
Actually, I'll give you one I heard this morning. I was just walking the dog and along the Yellowstone River, and
As you do.
As we do. There's a wolf out there. I never did see it, and we didn't have time to drive across the bridge and the couple miles back, but there was a wolf over there to the south, about a mile away. And the way we knew was the coyotes. The one particular coyote was alarming for 20, 30, 40 minutes constantly while we were there, and who knows how long before. And their typical call was, when they're saying, hi, this is our turf, is that sort of lets the neighborhood know that they're still at home and stay on their side of the fence. But it was, this call this morning sounded like this. And it just went on and on and on. And they don't do that unless there's trouble. That's an alarm bark. And over the years, I've come to know, even from a distance of 3 miles or however far one could hear, exactly what's going on across the valley just by tuning into the natural conversations. And you're right. The goal really is trying to shift our perspective, even in commonly held places, to see what Craig is talking about in common places. If you're super motivated, that this might be the summer of butterflies for you, or pick a topic, pick a location, and study it as much as you possibly can and find those things. But for us lately, we live here, and yes, Yellowstone is crowds. It's been mounting earlier in the year as the years go on, and they're staying later. But that's one tiny piece of a place that's 2.2 million acres in an ecosystem that's approximately 18 million. There's a lot of space that has no people. And a lot of people enjoy that ability to get away from what is normal existence for us these days, and find that little slice of themselves that still yearns for this diversity, this wildness, this freedom, true freedom, not freedom of press or not freedom of, religion, freedom of being that these places offer. And for us being here, and it's like, oh my gosh, we all, even living here, we're tied to the computer so much and other things, but making a date on the calendar and sharing it with my wife. We're like, we're going Thursday. I don't know where we're going. We've always looked at this one place and we haven't walked in there ever. Let's just go. It might be a half-hour walk. It might be 3 hours, and lo and behold, we might stay 6 or 8. But so often in spending time with people who may have never come here before, there's a very profound sense that some articulate as a feeling of coming home. They've never been there before, yet it feels like coming home. And I think that space is available to us, not just in places like Yellowstone or, these far reaches of the world that folks sometimes get to. The best place to step over that threshold is literally out the threshold of your own door.
Well, Craig made a really good point about that when we were last talking. Do you remember, Craig, you were saying that when you found yourself in London the last time, you were needing to try to ground yourself with nature. And of course, London actually does have big parks, and there is quite a lot of wildlife in London. I was just there last week and watching the foxes playing on my mother's studio roof again in the middle of London. However, when you're tramping the concrete, like really, really in the middle of London, it's very good to remind yourself that you're still on the same planet that Yellowstone's on, or that island in the Indian Ocean is on. Or it used to blow my mind when I would go up to Scotland, for example, and you could walk up in Scotland for like 5 days and see like 2 people in certain areas and say, shit, I'm on the same island that London is on, which is this kind of oversized metropolis, on this small island, but yet it hasn't actually conquered the island at all. I do hear you with that coming home feeling, George, and it can come when we get into the deep wild places, or it can come when we find the deep wild in the non-wild places, because of course it's still there. And Craig's point about finding the feeding sites of slugs and on algae on paving stones and being able to see the little toothed edges of how they've been feeding, and then looking at, okay, well, what's the story for who's coming now to eat the slugs and who's coming now to eat the bird that eats the slugs? And there comes this, pied warbler or whatever it is that we're now noticing, which we might not have noticed before. And now we notice, okay, well, there are foxes here and they are predating on that bird. And suddenly we're back in tracking mind, and we're doing it in the middle of the city. That homecoming feeling, something that I wanted to ask you guys. I think all of us often feel, and I'm sure listeners do too, that when you enter any real focused interaction with nature, you basically go into an altered state of consciousness. Or do we? Or is it only that we're living in an altered state of consciousness in the modern world that we live in, so that when we go back and we find the original state of consciousness, we consider that an altered state of consciousness? Which is it? Or is it both? What do you guys think?
It's such an interesting question, Rupert, because it feels when we've got so much distraction now, and I can immediately go back to, a month or so ago on the island, no cell phone signal. I was, often alone for hours and hours, and tremendous quietness, and everything quietens down, and you feel like you're in an altered state. But then you soon realize that was the normal state of our ancestors. And while you were talking, I was thinking, well, our minds are built, they're built from the bricks of the minds of our ancestors. That's how we're only thinking like we are because of those who've come before us.
Mm.
So when I'm making a fire or whatever, that deep Homo erectus ancestor is right there doing it. So I think that we are in some sort of altered state now that has been, but it's kind of like, it's a shallow state because we've got so many distractions. So we can't get into that deeper state that you need for tracking, that you need for understanding animals because of all this technology and all these distractions. So it's a really interesting question you ask. I mean, it can be flipped either way. What do you think, George?
I agree. It's a wonderful question because I think it gets to where we've come in the last few centuries, which is a state of being that occupies a space independent of that which our brain's building blocks were founded on, as Craig said. And we're just sort of in this maelstrom of activity and input, trying to adapt to this new situation that is so foreign to the very substance of what we are. And so, yeah, when we do get into those spaces and states, it seems altered, and yet those states are where the greatest listening, the greatest discoveries, the greatest creativity. We always say this. My wife and I, Jenny, will go for a walk, and we do it out of exasperation sometimes. Like, we need to get away. We need to get out. We're going to drive. Not we could walk at our back door. We just to mentally create the space. We drive somewhere, and instantly we're interacting better, more genuinely.
That was going to be my next question. What do you guys think about nature and conflict resolution, high biodiversity and conflict resolution? Just in your own lives. Just go on with that, George. Let's go back to your wife. As she rises the frying pan over your head from the corner.
Make an analogy, it's like the pores open up. It's this flow through that those settings instill in us. Like we're more creative. We might be talking about an idea for a program or an art, a piece of writing, and these ideas they start exploding. Like, oh, we could include this and do this, and yet sitting in the house or sitting at the office is just this mental space that we sort of build is not serving us. What serves us is to be more permeable, I guess, is the way that it feels like to me. When we're out, it's not me. It's not you. It's not even us as a reference to the people. It's, oh my gosh, did you just see that bird rocket through after that other bird? Oh my gosh, there's a rabbit just jumped. Did you catch that? And, it's a great example. A friend was doing a lot of urban school children groups, and they give them all a camera. And the first 3 days, all of the photos were of themselves and their friends. At about day 3, there's a flower. There's a mountain scene.
That's interesting.
There's a geyser. There's a textured log on the ground. And to me, that speaks to this inherent curiosity and desire on our part to sift into something bigger and more than us. And as a result, I feel like I personally find more of myself or step out of myself as often as needed by entering those spaces.
Can I add to that?
Yeah, please.
Well, I've got the idea in my head. So you're asking about the conflict resolution in these spaces. And for me, it's so unnatural that we put so much pressure on our human relationships. It's just like that's never happened before. So, in the world of our design, we have these relationships with all the tiny creatures. We've got relationships with predators. We've got the relationships with prey. Hundreds and hundreds of these relationships with different forms of animals. And a lot of our being is taken up with that. Now we sever that. All those incredible threads, those bonds are severed, and all the pressure is on these human relationships.
That's so
When you
true.
go into these spaces, those threads start to reweave, and it just lifts all that pressure on your wife or your children or whoever, and suddenly you're working with this pantheon of creatures, and humans are just part of that, and that feels far, far more peaceful.
You know what? Obviously, Craig and I, share this. We share this experience in the Kalahari with San Bushmen, who are non-warriors and appear to be the human blueprint. So it would appear that humans are not really warriors, that this comes in somewhere after agriculture. And so what gets so confusing, I think, is that if you're involved in agriculture or herding, you are involved in nature very deeply. And you still have these big relationships with all these different species. You still have the weather matters, okay, all of the things we know. And yet out of those cultures came war and conflict creation rather than conflict resolution, overpopulation, four horsemen of the apocalypse, all of that stuff, pestilence, all from overpopulation, whether it's in villages, whether it's in cities. But that's 10,000 plus years ago now. So for most of us, including the three of us sitting here, we're inheritors in our immediate DNA of that conflict warrior culture. And, you and I, Craig, our forebears were colonial pirates. You and I were lucky enough to get involved in land rights restoration of the very indigenous people that our ancestors had a part in kicking off the land. And it was good and felt good to pay that karmic debt to a large degree. George, you're sitting there in Yellowstone, 19th century, earliest national park formed. Why? Because they kicked the people out. And, the Nez Perce Indians, I don't know if they were the only ones there, but they're certainly the ones that the stories are told because of Chief Joseph running away from the American cavalry hunting him to, pacify the West. And now we come out of that conflict society, that Viking society. Bumann, you're Germanic, Craig, you're Anglo-Saxon, Dutch, Germanic. I am too, with that little bit of Ashkenazi Jew that just won't go away, and the Rabbi Rupert. But nonetheless, we have in us both the ones who help to sever, as you said, and the ones who wanted to remain connected. And so we've been lucky to find ourselves in these places of biodiversity. The human mind is biodiverse, right? The human mind is it's like a forest, no? Axons like trees, dendrites going out to wire, like branches, like twigs, branches and roots to wire with others. And it seems that if we get rigid in our thoughts, we become like a plantation of eucalyptus or pines that someone's going to chop down. Or if the mind is allowed to do what it needs to do, it becomes like a wilder ecosystem with more possibility. Given that most people are going to be coming out of this feeling of constant conflict, this feeling of constantly being in the amygdala, with cortisol, the stress hormone, that we have this crazy tolerance for it, it seems, but it drives us insane. You are both in the business of bringing the stories from the wild places to people's screens, to bringing people directly out into it, to creating art that tells the story of that. How do you see your roles there as conflict resolvers, whether on the meta scale or the minor scale. I'd like you guys to talk about what you do from that perspective, and through that, how can people listening pick up some tips about how to resolve internal and external conflict through direct interaction with nature and bringing the stories of nature that they've tracked back with them. Do you want to kick off with that, George? And then do you want to just...
Sure.
Yeah.
I can take a stab at it. I think it's a very potent question, and one that needs to be worked on all the time, I would say, because we, by our very nature, have done a lot of things that, if mankind had its chance to do over again, maybe we would pick a different path. But here we are, and I think one of the greatest services to life and to community is to tell this story in a way that includes all of the voices. I've spent a lot of time listening to wild animal conversations, and in nature you quickly realize that there is no outlander, there is no immigrant. It is only us in this moment. So poo-pooing the starling because it's its European ancestry, poo-pooing the dandelion because most of those species or variations were brought to North America, trying to eradicate these things when in fact, there is certainly is a place for maintaining native plant communities and so on. But in nature, all of the conversations and all of the speakers are valid, accepted, and contribute.
So true.
And so when we tell the story of Yellowstone, there on record, there's 30-ish, 35, tribes that had affiliations here. It's probably closer to 50. We do our very best in our programming to bring those voices in, let them speak for themselves, not tell their stories for them. And, curate the best we can, a recircling and a resorting of the deck so that we have a picture that fits the current time. It's so easy, and we do it subconsciously, is to tell the story from our perspective, for which that's all we have, right? My Germanic ancestors were the first settlers in the part of New York that was cleared of the Haudenosaunee people when George Washington cleared the entire landscape of those tribal allies to make way for my European ancestors. And so I can't undo that, but what I can do is make sure that what's going on now is honest about that, and honest about what we've done to the tribes of non-humans, and allow other people
Tribes of Non-Humans. That's a book title.
Perhaps so. But it just, diversity, we crave that diversity. You want to get all the baseball cards, you want all the knickknacks, you want all, we crave that sense of variety as the spice of life, and we are not the keepers of that as an individual being. We must be in community. We must be in association with others to supply what we have our blind spots for, or have neglected, or have missed. I'll stop there. I'll let Craig chime in here.
So what came to mind when you asked the question, Rupert, was fundamentally what I'm trying to bring across, and so the help of a wonderful team, is this very simple idea that Mother Nature is the shareholder of everything we do, all our businesses, all our endeavors. She is the foundation. She's the life force. She's everything. Yet we've forgotten that. I've said this before, but I purposely say it again because it's such a fundamental thing. Like, if you take away the biodiversity that we're talking about now, every single thing will collapse. We won't be able to breathe, eat, function. And this is what we've forgotten. So
fire up all that AI. How are we going to power it? Yeah,
Yeah,
if not through
no,
nature.
no, it's just a joke. Everything will collapse.
Yeah.
The AI will go very fast. So it's like if we could just put all this incredible mental force we've got into looking after the most foundational thing that will affect every single human's life on this planet more than anything else. It seems the logical way to go, but people have somehow conveniently forgotten this. So it's trying to bring that story back. And how do you do that? I think, ultimately it's through storytelling, because storytelling is this foundation for the way we operate. So
Mm.
everything that we see around us is based upon a story.
We are
So
the
we need,
storytelling ape too.
yeah,
We have the
exactly.
larynx. Yeah, yeah.
So we need to change the story from this massive extractive force to one of reciprocity. And the one of the new and interesting ways we're trying to do that is through this project we've called 1001 Sea Forest Species. And I don't know if you want me to go into some of the detail now or
We
leave
want
it
you to
for a
go
bit
into some of the
later.
detail now.
Okay. So it's taken many years to get to the point we are, and will take quite a lot more years. But essentially what we're doing is studying 1,001 animals in the Great African Sea Forest and on the intertidal shore. Getting a beautiful scientific page on each animal, its proper scientific name, and then layering into that powerful stories, like these incredible stories that George tells us of these face-to-face encounters with these incredible animals. The personal stories, they're pieces of their secret lives. Then adding to that these, high-level photographs that are almost like love letters to these animals, beautiful images, short films on them, anecdotes, incredible bits of behavior. So suddenly you've got this interwoven digital platform that stores all the memory, because I'm already forgetting half of what I've already encountered. It's too much. But if I can store it in there, and the prof who we're working with, and Yanis, the PhD biologist, and all the other team members, we put it in and we create this hive mind of this incredible ecosystem.
Hive
It's like a
mind.
hive
Ooh,
mind.
that's the
Yeah.
follow-up to the tribes of nature. Yeah.
It's this incredible pulsing, beating heart
Mm.
of these creatures. And the smallest ones that you can, most people will never ever see, have stories, have a voice. And then you can show other people in other parts of the world. They don't have to go and do it at this intense level. They could just take 10 or 50 animals that they're in their backyards
Mm.
and do the same thing, build a hive mind of them and let them speak as well. Let biodiversity speak. Let the divine creation that is manifest in nature have a voice. It's a very, very powerful way of getting this idea back that she is this thing that's kept us alive from the beginning.
Mm.
And if we aren't careful with her, we're going to be extinct, basically. I mean, it's a horrible thing to say, but she's holding us up every second.
Give us a story on one of the things that is so small that we don't even see it or notice it, that's in your 1001 Species project.
I was just working on it's called the Cape Marginella this morning,
Cape
and
Marginella.
Cape Marginella, and these are tiny little predatory snails, like a cleanup crew. They live underneath the sand and they put their little proboscises up through the sand, and they've got incredible smell, and they're just waiting. And if any animal is dead or dying or injured, they come out en masse and they just envelop it and they consume it.
In the
So
kelp
they just,
forest.
yes. And 99.9% of people who've dived have definitely never seen one. So if an octopus makes a kill, they just onto that kill immediately. They clean it up. They clean the smell up. And what's amazing is they have this ability, and this is like the secret life. If they get a piece of flesh or a tiny animal that's died, they can wrap it into a bundle and pop it into a compartment on the back of the mantle, and then they charge away to try and get away with this thing that they can eat. And I've got images and pictures of this
And
extraordinary
are there other
behavior.
snails trying to stop them when they do that?
Yes, yes, they're all fighting like rugby scrumming to get hold of this thing, but it's
This
so
gives me
beautifully wrapped that
an
they can get
animated.
away, and then they go underneath the sand and away, and then consume it. So I mean, it's just there are these hundreds and hundreds of these incredible stories that they've just been sitting on this giant hard drive. Just what's going to
How
happen
did you
to
find
it?
out
And
about the Cape Marginella?
I've been, looking very, very closely at octopus and their kills, and then wondering what's happening afterwards, and looking very just, staying still
Okay.
after a kill, just holding on underwater. And then you see these tiny little proboscises coming up, these tiny creatures coming out, and some even like coming down from the kelp. And then they go inside the shell where the predation's been made. And if you're not quick enough, you don't see them. And then suddenly the shell is clean. They've just cleaned out everything. So it's just from this fine observation that you've seen them. And then it got these incredible, images and video of these amazing behaviors. And you get the scent, their smell is just phenomenal.
Before we hit the record button, you said that it was going to take about a decade to get all this material together. What's your... do we have to wait that long, or are you going to release it in sort of wadges that we can
Yes.
enjoy?
Yeah. So fairly
and
soon, the first layer of the app will be available. You don't need Wi-Fi, and people can take it out into the field, and literally anything they see will be in there. And it's a bit of a tracking thing to find it.
Anything they see in the kelp forest, or anything they see in
Anything they see on the shore or in the kelp forest will be
Okay,
in there.
okay.
It's very unlikely they'll find anything that's not. And then you'll be able to get a sense for it. But we're going to add the layers and layers and layers as time goes past.
Craig, you've been one of my heroes since I've known you, but you just confirmed why you're one of my heroes. It's like one of the things which we do in what we call movement method, which is the way we work. It started with autism, but now it's schools or people with, looking for a neuroplasticity boost, is this thing of, okay, fine, not everybody can get into the forests of Germany immediately, or down into the kelp forest, or into Yellowstone, or wherever. And yes, you can learn to see the slug tracks where they've eaten in the middle of London, but when you're a kid who is born to be sort of awed as much by the big stuff as by the little stuff, you may or may not be open to something so detailed. At least you might need to go through something a bit more obvious before you can look for the fine detail. And one of the things which we do, therefore, is, because people are stuck in classrooms, because they're stuck in therapy offices, which are just shit, they're just linoleum and fluorescent strip lights. And so I'm going to make you feel better. It's like, no, you're not. There's no way you can possibly make me feel better, because look, no. But as you say, severed from the ancestral connection with nature, how would that therapist even know? So we have this thing about just bringing the outside inside. So generally we do these classroom makeovers where I'll say, I just want to see antler in here. I want to see bone. I want to see sheepskin. I want to see animal hides. I want to see sand. I want to see wood chips. I want to see different types of light. I want to see stuff that would be in a hunting and gathering camp, so that when the kids touch it, it will trigger an ancestral memory. And there's enough studies done now just showing how, for example, toys made out of natural objects, affect the brain better than toys made out of plastic or whatever. You guys do this on a meta scale. You bring back these stories, Craig, that the films that you've made have made millions, tens of millions of people now look more closely at nature. You've really done an amazing job with this. George, your books and the art that you do, I feel, composites of stories that bring them into human environments. That amazing place that you live in. So talk to me, George, about the process of putting natural story into art and then giving that natural story to people to bring into their non-natural environments. And what's that process for you from an emotional point of view as well?
Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen you, and anyone listening should go and find the YouTube video of George. We'll put a link to it, doing a clay wolf on a TEDx talk as he's talking. You should see him do it. This is story.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's important that we get away from Craig's waving another one of my creations in front of the camera.
Okay.
It's a Clovis reproduction, a spear point, one of the older technologies from the prehistory of North America, and ironically one of the most difficult points to reproduce.
Is it? Why is it so difficult, out of interest?
Largely because of, can you see the flake
I would
that
have
goes
thought that
from the
was a
bottom?
real artifact.
Yeah, that's why I sign them, so if they somehow fall out of someone's pocket, they don't get confused for it. I've had some friends pull one over on their friends with some of my reproductions. But one of the hardest
about a
parts,
12,000-year-old type of point.
correct?
Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. And this is the type of weaponry used to hunt mammoths and wild horses and camels and things that existed in North America at that time. What makes it tough is that flake that goes up the base from the bottom toward the tip. And to get that to happen on both sides, I've broken hundreds to get to just a handful that I have completed. And I only give them to people I really appreciate in person. So maybe
I was going to say, thanks for the Clovis point.
Yeah. Well, we need to meet up in person, and perhaps one will appear. Craig and I had that on his book tour, as our mutual friend John was kind enough to hook us up. But back to the topic of just art, I think we need to step away from the story we've been referring to it as a spoken word story. Craig's doing it beautifully in the digital realm with his films. I'm doing it with my hands. I'm making sculptures. I think I can show you one of these here. This, to me, is a story. This is a miniature basket I made from a local plant for my wife for Christmas, and dyed some of it with black walnut. But in this little basket is a story of...
Brilliant, George.
Well, thank you. But it has its own story. I have the relationship I have with this patch of plants, and I curate them and take care of these plants and weed out the dead stems. And I've learned so much about my home through these plants. And so it comes with this experience of place that when you look at sadly, when they're in museums and separated from the people and the landscapes where they're created, these historic works, you just feel maybe not the details of, but the thrust of this relationship with the landscape, with nature, with one another. And when I'm working on a sculpture, I don't use photographs. I sketch either on paper or I sketch in clay or wax, and I may finish the piece in the field, although a lot of pieces I have to wait till that bison is back in that same coat pattern next year to finish it. But a lot of times those sculptures might be 5, 6, 8, 10, 12 years in the making, because I don't want to create just a representation that visually makes you think of a wolf or a bear, but these are in essence my travel logs from years and years of really detailed study. So I have my own data sheets. I had a fishing tackle box, and I threw all the fishing tackle out and made my own data sheets to take 50 plus measurements on every mammal that I find deceased, and have tape measures and calipers and dissecting knives and rubber gloves and pencils and pens and all of this, making death masks, which was a historic thing that artists did of people. When someone passed away, it was a common thing in the 19th century to make a plaster cast, a death mask of their face. Making those of animals that I'm able to deepens an understanding and appreciation for them that I see in the movement of the sun on a given day. I spend the entire day watching elk just to understand what their body looks like and how it functions at exactly this time of the year, with their coat pattern exactly the way it is. And you don't see that subtle relief of the ribs and that subtle push of the ilial crest of the pelvis until the sun gets just at a certain angle and they turn at a certain angle. And so what I create in clay, to me, is the accumulation of just mountains of time paying attention. And the sculptures, to me, are also an excuse to look deeper. You know, Craig's collections and his video and his journals function similar to mine in that way, where they help inspire more questions. All right, well, what if this was an adult instead of a subadult or a juvenile? Oh my gosh, holy cow. And then there's other elements within there, like she's walking a little funny. Oh my gosh, you can actually see the very subtle bump on her metatarsal bone where she must have broken her leg at one point. So the stories in these layers, like what Craig's was doing, the story helps build the next story. The story helps you look further into the experience.
I so agree. You know, when we signed off from our last conversation, Craig, you were talking about journaling. So, of course, I probably have to start journaling. So I found myself very quickly after that. And what's journaling but story? It's just gathering story. And exactly as you just described, George, you know, this observation. So a friend of mine who runs a fox hunt in northern Germany, but it's not an actual fox hunt because I don't do that anymore. We layer scent and we ride after that, but it's still the hounds who have to work it out. And so on. Asked me to come up and spend 3 days hunting, three days in a row hunting, because they needed the support. They were short of manpower. And I said, of course. And not my horse, though. And normally when you go and you trust your life to the unpredictable country, you, particularly if it's going to involve jumping, it's better to be on a horse that you have a deep relationship with, because, and there's a story there. But it wasn't, and I was in an area of Germany I didn't know. And we're in this forest, and I've got Craig's words going in my mind as we're laying the lines and helping the hounds find the lines, and saying, yeah, in this highly human affected landscape that we're in, it's still, we're now the wolf pack. We're taking the place of what the wolf pack was. It's just a modified human wolf pack. And now that particular form of it that we're doing is about 300 years old. I'm on this horse that's designed to run really fast and jump these fences, which was evolved at exactly the same time 300 years ago for this purpose, which was taking stock from the original steppe herders of Central Asia, what we call the Turkoman horse, which is now the ancestor of the thoroughbred horse, and mixing it with the Arabian horse. I'm on an Anglo-Arab, as they call it, very hot horse to ride. And this has now come up to northern Germany, but actually they would have come in here long before, because the Goths and the Lombards and the Gepids and the Vandals and the Sueves and the Alemanni and all these tribes that would have been pushed into this part of Germany from the east by the Huns, because of climate change, 2000 years ago, established these cultures of the horse here. And that we are still actually kind of the indigenous people that were always here, practicing the same culture. And as I'm thinking this, the hounds bring us past these megaliths and these old burial mounds, these old stone burial mounds, dolmens, with the capped stone on top, from 5, 6, 7,000 years ago. I didn't even know we're in this forest. And I had an experience like that before in Cornwall once, hunting in the mist, and the mist came up and I found I was in the middle of a stone circle on my horse, but alone. And you feel that touch of the divine come. It's like the old Celtic god Canonos or something, it's with you in that moment, and you must give respect and ride on. And so I get this sense of the story of the horse that I'm on is being brought in here by these tribes. And then these were the same tribes that would have had a common ancestor with these guys thousands of years before even that, building these grave mounds. And then what are we but the human wolf pack? Okay, but now that the hounds which create the wolf pack, where are the wolves? And then it's, but the wolves are coming back. In all these parts of Germany, for the first time in 150 years, the wolves are coming back. And not, in fact, we had been warned going out that we could run into wolf. And would our hounds be all right? Were they going to be all right? Blah, 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 blah. In this area that 150 years ago wiped them out, despite the fact that there was this deep connection with nature. This is the area where all the Grimm's fairy tales come from. So Little Red Riding Hood Forest is 1 hour north of here. Wolves don't get a very good rap in that one, do they? Hansel and Gretel Forest, it's an hour the other way. The Sleeping Beauty Castle is just a couple of hours from me. Blah, 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 blah. And here we are in amongst all this, in all this story, living this story, still practicing the story. And the older story is coming back. First these megaliths and then the wolf itself. Not 5 days ago, in the same village that I'm sitting in here, which is much, much closer to the city, we're pretty close to downtown Frankfurt here. Someone, my friend Philip, sends me a picture of a big male wolf just walking on the hills, just on the other side from this window that I'm pointing at here. And this thing of full circle and is that not conflict resolution, right? And to bring a story into oneself and to sort of live it and ride it, if you like, and experience it as a living story and realize this is what's going on, and then think, oh my gosh, even that comes from conflict and the resolution. Because why are all these wolves here anyway? Because of Chernobyl, because of the nuclear disaster in Chernobyl in 1986, where they had to mark off a huge area of Central Europe and say no one can go in there. So what happened? Nature just reestablished itself. And apparently these wolves that are showing up here have a gene that's been switched on, which is anti-radiation, which is why they thrived. And now they've overpopulated that Chernobyl area and they've gone out. And that's why they've now come into Germany. And that's why they're now showing up in the Netherlands and Belgium, where they, have been gone forever, wiped out in the Little Red Riding Hood time, so on and so on and so on. And conflict and conflict resolution.
As you know, if you followed any of my work, I'm an autism dad. And we have a whole career before this podcast in helping people with neurodivergence, either who are professionals in the field. Are you a therapist? Are you a caregiver? Are you a parent? Or are you somebody with neurodivergence? When my son Rowan was diagnosed with autism in 2004, I really didn't know what to do. So I reached out for mentorship, and I found it through an amazing adult autistic woman who's very famous, Dr. Temple Grandin. And she told me what to do. And it's been working so amazingly for the last 20 years that not only is my son basically independent, but we've helped countless thousands of others reach the same goal, working in schools, working at home, working in therapy settings. If you would like to learn this cutting-edge neuroscience-backed approach, it's called Movement Method. You can learn it online. You can learn it very, very simply. It's almost laughably simple. The important thing is to begin. Let yourself be mentored as I was by Dr. Grandin and see what results can follow. Go to this website, newtrailslearning.com. Sign up as a gold member. Take the online Movement Method course. It's in 40 countries. Let us know how it goes for you. We really want to know. We really want to help people like me, people like you out there live their best life, to live free, ride free, see what happens.
Do you feel, guys, that what we're having to learn how to do again in our conflict culture is to learn how to track, learn how to hunt nature itself again?
That one's you, Craig.
Yeah, that's a tough one.
I just want to point out it's a long time since we had any animal sounds, George.
Yeah. I am missing those sounds. I must say.
And what is that?
Common raven
Telling us
saying,
what?
"My turf, this is my home. Explain yourself because you weren't invited."
So explain yourself, Craig. Are we having to? Are we indeed having to learn how to track nature again as a species?
I think we've definitely lost track. I mean, to be this idea of being in conflict with the Great Mother, which we are in now, is an absurd place to be. I mean, why would you wage conflict against the very thing that's nurtured you from the beginning of your species and keeps nurturing you despite
It's
everything
madness,
you've
isn't
thrown
it?
at it. It unfortunately is a definition of insanity, but it's understandable given all the pressures. This shifting baselines, and each new generation gets forced into these strange places and these linoleum covered environments where there's no hint of ancestral connection. The knowledge of the elders, no longer there to guide us. I think it's absolutely critical that we really start to understand where we are sitting and just how fragile our position is. Because this great mother that's there, this biological intelligence, this biodiversity, is very strong. We can push her down, and she will make life impossible for us to live, and then she'll bounce back in 10 million different ways, like
Just
she's
like the
done
wolf.
before.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's just like the wolf from Chernobyl. But I think, it's easy to see ourselves as a dark species, but we're actually so beautiful in so many ways. And we understand at capacity for this, loving the mother at such a deep level. What George is talking about, the just watching those elk and understanding them over the years, that's a form of deep love and respect. And in his art, and this incredible, like Clover's point, when he gave it to me, I was just, deeply emotional, because you can feel, if you know napping and stone tool making, the tremendous energy, power, and practice it takes to do this. I think it took him 30 years to master these points. Am I right, George?
Yeah.
The amount of the capacity for the love we have is just tremendous in all humans. So we actually, I think, are a very beautiful species. And it's worth keeping us alive, but we just have lost track completely of our relationship with the bigger forces that actually are in charge of our future.
And a lot of it's distraction. I think certainly the conflict and is in the background working on us, but the distraction that we referenced earlier is enormous. So often I'll take students or class out into Yellowstone, and the intention is to understand bird language, for instance, and we go out and we just sit, and the only rules are no watches, no phones, no nothing. I'll keep track of the time. You just sit and watch and listen. And to some people, so they're like, we don't have to do anything. So initially, that and alone for a lot of people is a huge relief. We're human doings. We're not human
Well,
beings.
that can also be very scary, can't it?
It can. So you kind of
Who
curate
am I
it,
if
and
I'm not doing something. Yeah.
exactly, and that's, I struggle with that very much.
Yeah,
What is this thing about me working on something, or just reading a book, for crying out loud? I should not.
Is that not because we actually ought to be kind of tracking all the time? Do you remember which of the guys was it in The Great Dance, Craig, who said of the three sun hunters that you're always tracking?
Yeah.
You're never not tracking, right?
No, yeah.
And is our desire for distraction simply our desire to be tracking when we're cut off from that?
Yeah.
Because it naturally just animates you and lifts you. But now you take that away, the mind is searching. That's an interesting idea.
But I guess you're right, George. You have to have a certain quietude to create the space where the
We
right
have to give
kind of
ourselves that
doing
greatest
becomes-
gift. That greatest gift is the time and space. And sometimes you have to legislate it for yourself. Put it on the calendar like a doctor's appointment. If you look at other species who are contained and caged, they start these repetitive behaviors and damage inflicting behaviors. We in many ways resemble that caged animal. We are not exerting ourselves in the way that our nervous system needs. I'm in the process of correcting my own eyesight naturally. Wearing glasses since I was 12. And one thing I didn't write about in the book with the magpie experience that we talked about in the last podcast episode was I had this moment of that altered state, but I also, and I didn't write about this, had absolutely perfect vision for just a few seconds. And what I've found is through this process, and this was a technique developed and studied and figured out in New York in the late 1800s and early 1900s, it was the end of glasses. The eyes are an extension of the brain's nervous tissue. And when the brain is out of sorts, the eyesight is out of sorts. Quite literally, when I'm out in nature and I feel that relaxation with practice in this technique known as the Bates method, I get a lot more and longer periods of clear vision now. And as one keeps doing this, you don't need your glasses anymore, whether that's nearsighted, farsighted. I have astigmatisms. I can see the top of that mountain right now. I can see individual trees. And they've done studies on Native Alaskans at the time they started educating those Native children in westernized schools, and their eyesight went down precipitously. And yet in the Native community where the elders were taught in the old ways and lived in the old ways, they had perfect vision into their 70s, 80s, and beyond.
What is the Bates method?
It's, on the whole, it's a technique that teaches you to relax. Think of a water balloon is basically what the eyeball is, and any slight influence on that changes the shape and hence the clarity that you perceive. And we have these clenched fists.
Yeah.
Some people keep them in their back, some people keep them in their legs, their jaw muscles, and those of us who need vision correction often keep them in these muscles we don't even know we have in the orbits of our eyes that are squeezing the eyeballs in ways that distort our vision. And as we learn to let those relax, the eye takes its natural and healthy state and we just see clearly. It then affects our mental space, our mood, I've been going without glasses for a while, and a lot of that early state, I felt isolated from my community. I wouldn't recognize people in the grocery store, and they'd have to wave, And I think a lot of things that go through our minds, even if they don't distort our actual eyesight, they isolate us. These lessons of nature are to expand us. And through the expansions, I personally feel like those are the spaces where I'm my best self. I'm healthier. I'm more creative, more relaxed.
I was doing a podcast the other day with a neuroscientist called Cheryl Pratt at University of Washington, and she made the point of that when we are forced to have focused attention for an unnatural period of time, it's so exhausting for the brain. Her book is The Neuroscience of You. It's really good. And they look at not how all the brains are the same, but how each brain is different in her lab. But that one of the generalities is that forced attention school, but also living in a city, she said, because if you're in a non-natural environment, you're actually honing in constantly on these framed points of attention because there's nowhere to generally rest your vision. That in nature, because the lines are soft, You go from sharp focused attention and then immediately relax. She was making the point that ADHD is largely brought on by the mental exhaustion of being forced to have too much focused attention and the fatigue that the brain goes through, rather than the tracking skill, which of course is what it is, of being able to narrow in, zoop, but then softly focus out again, and then zoop and focus out again. It's always balanced. And actually, you probably spend most of your time being able to rest the brain and, as you say, rest the eyes.
That's so interesting, Rupert, because this that's what I've noticed, and I know George has noticed this too in a big way, that when you're in these places, these near pristine places, or places of what I call the beating heart, when the biodiversity is all in place, you just feel totally different. It is just, and you feel sad that, so many people will not be able to experience this. You feel obviously we're very privileged, but it's just so different. The whole physicality, the whole mental space is different. You utterly is a different person there. And what it does is it starts to break down the self, and you start to feel part of everything, and you don't feel that sharp, nasty taste of the ego in your mouth. It naturally breaks that down and softens everything. And I love the way your neuroscientist friend has articulated that, because it's exactly the case. It fundamentally changes one. And it's not surprising. I mean, sure, you talk about, the last 10,000 years of the sort of much harsher ancestry post-agricultural revolution, but one doesn't think about the 3 million years of fully wild living that comes before that. That's a much deeper memory. That's much deeper in our psyche. That's who we really are. Forget about this last few seconds of 10,000 years. That's really what we are about. And that's where I think we desperately need to draw our inspiration from as we move forward.
Conflict resolution again, because I guess if it's healing conflicts within oneself, whether it's the conflict of the self, that horrible little voice always telling you your shit, the ego, or the exhausted muscles around the eyes squeezing the eyeballs because they don't get a chance to relax, even in somebody who's grown up like George has, because long before George got to Yellowstone National Park, he was exploring the forests of New England. It's not like George wasn't in natural environments, and yet even those of us who can access them, we still suffer because so much of our time has to be spent engaging economically. And isn't it interesting that, as you say, Craig, the 3 million years, and of course there are still people on the planet who are living in that 3 million year old authentic way.
Yeah.
It's easy to forget that. We often read in books, our hunter-gatherer ancestors. It's like, they're still there.
Yeah. Uncontacted wild people living. It's incredible.
They're still there. Yeah. It didn't go anywhere. We just stopped listening. But if the whole point of that culture is conflict resolution, because when you're not top predator, your only hope is strategy, together, love, communication. If you fragment, if conflict gets beyond a certain point, everyone's going to get eaten by the hyenas, which is, of course, what we're facing on a meta level as a species now with our conflicts. And we can all become extinct and become eaten by the hyenas, as you say, different types of hyena. So much of it still comes down to this idea of conflict resolution. And what you were saying earlier, that love, if we're a species of love, we talk about we're a storytelling species, but what is storyable love? I remember once I was on Table Mountain, and this is when I was 25, and so obviously back in the Pleistocene, and I came down with a fever, and I went up Table Mountain with my cousin Simon, who's actually still psychiatrist in the Cape Town area, and his flatmate Loshni, who's now a psychiatrist in London. And it was one of the few times in my life I've ever actually become delirious. And then I was like, shit, how am I going to get down? Right? Because, Table Mountain. Okay, so I've got to think now, and I've got to try to be, and I'm in an altered state of consciousness before I kind of knew what that word meant. And as I'm coming down the mountain in this altered state of consciousness, this thought comes to me where I remembered in the chapel at school, there was this. Why did it come into my mind then? In the chapel in school, there was an inscription that one often sees on the wall of a chapel: God is love and love is God. And I remember as a kid thinking, yeah, that's true. Just in the way that, yeah, that's true. That's true. Don't know why I know that's true, but it's true. This same thought comes to me as I'm stumbling now down the mountain. And as you know, that's a very powerful place shamanically, Table Mountain, the tip of the continent, tip of where humanity becomes two oceans meet. Yeah, whatever. And I realized, well, if God is love and love is God, then everything is God, which means that the stones under me, all matter must be God, which means the shirt I'm wearing, which is created from cotton, which is a plant, must be love. And the paint job on the car down there that we're stumbling towards, which is coming from chemicals that come from rocks that are matter created, must be love. And the car door that I'm opening now, with the metal that it's made of, and the fossil fuel that maybe it's not so good, but nonetheless is a fossilized forest, is love. Even the gas powering this car is love. And I thought, well, what about hate then? What about torture? What about atrocity? What about war? Where's that? And then this thought came, that's twisted forms of love removed from the source, expressing insane pain, but it's still love. And with that, I passed out. But I never forgot it. Did I need to be on a place like Table Mountain to have that revelation? Talk to me, guys, about how you've come to your view of nature and love. Are there some moments of epiphany that stand out for you that way? Kick off whoever can bring one to mind quickest.
I talked last. Craig, it's your turn.
I was looking at you, George.
You can make animal sounds and then we'll forget. Oh, that's so cool.
There you go.
You won't have to embarrass yourself. What's that?
That's an elk.
Is it? Oh, yes, it is.
Red stag. Yeah, or red stag, relative of
is it bugling? Or is it
no, it's a cow. That's a female's vocalization
Yeah.
calling her calf.
Yeah. Can you just give us the bugling of the male quickly?
If my throat's clear enough.
I can now see why they call it bugling. So I often wondered that because, with red deer, which is the European equivalent, they don't make that sound. It's more like
they bark.
Sort of.
Yeah, they roar.
Yeah.
Very unmanly sound when some people hear it for the first time. They're like, we're expecting more like that. Roar, like the bison do, They're like, no, that's our elk.
I somehow feel unmanned personally by that. That's
yeah.
So,
anyway,
yeah.
I digress.
Okay.
Craig, it's all
That's
you.
a great digression. Craig, falling in love with nature. How did it happen for you?
So I think, the natural thing for me when I was younger was to try and you feel that inside you. You feel that 3 million-year-old ancestral pull. And because of the strange place you grow up in, you've got absolutely no idea really of how to find that. So you go for the cliche. You go for, it must be in the wildest, most dangerous place. So, I started with big sharks and then progressed to diving, in giant crocodile lairs, going down the tunnels in the Okavango to the place where these massive reptiles drag their prey, thinking that might be a good place to find what you're talking about. But because you can only spend literally minutes in these places, and we were very lucky to make it out alive. It's what George is saying. You get absolutely you get this unbelievable adventure and in way too much adrenaline, but you don't get any of that incredible detail that he's talking about. So it was an amazing adventure, but ironically, I came back here to the Great African Sea Forest and started studying an animal that you would think would be very boring and wouldn't bring you anywhere. And that's the humble limpet. This is an animal that kind of looks like a rock. It doesn't seem to move much.
Why did you choose that animal?
Because they're so accessible. I can go down every single low tide and observe these animals. It's also the world hotspot for limpets, about 25 species or more, from the massive giant limpet to the, tiny little ear limpet. But I was like just watching these animals day in, day out, and not much was happening. And then suddenly you get these epiphanies, and they take you into their secret lives, deeper and deeper. And you think, okay, I've looked at them now every day for a year. That's it. And then the next day, oh my goodness, you knew nothing. And it takes you deeper and deeper. They're fertilizing their gardens at low tide, pooping on their own algal gardens. They're trimming the gardens just to the right amount. They're growing certain algae. They, tend the gardens for years. I mean, it is, incredible ways of trying to avoid predation, extreme predators hunting them. I mean, it's just this absolute, but what happens at a certain stage, and this is the critical thing, you suddenly feel like your consciousness is starting to blend a little bit with the limpet consciousness, as hard as that sounds. This is a mollusk, that lives in a shell. It's like a snail, an ocean snail of a sort, highly modified. And then you go into what's growing on the shell. You've got these marine lichens boring into their shells, and they're building them up to survive. You can look at each shell, and you can tell how that animal has lived, in what environment, by the shape of the shell, by how it's being carved by the rocks around it. And what happens is you start to merge to some degree with limpet consciousness. So, and you feel like you're part of that intertidal environment somehow. Somehow your mind is, and you can figure things out. You can think of what it might be like to be in a storm as a limpet, or what it's like to feed, or how you're dealing with the sun and the heat, and where all these biotic pressures are moving you around. And suddenly you feel the beating heart of the intertidal in your own beating heart. That's very different to going into a crocodile lair a few times. You actually feel part of this thing. And that's the critical thing, is that the sense of belonging. This is the most key word, belonging. So you feel that you belong on this planet. You're part of it. You're a wild animal in a sense, living the strange domesticated existence. But you are actually a wild animal at heart. And then you feel that it's hard to, it doesn't want to sound like a cliche, but you feel the immensity of the creation of this biodiversity that's literally inside you and keeping you alive from second to second. And that, it's like, nature and all this diversity and this incredible detail and these lives of these animals is the most closest thing I've ever come to the divine manifest in something you can actually witness and feel and appreciate and understand. It's manifested. in a way. It's so complex and so extraordinary. So it becomes the simple creature, as a limpet, it seems simple, but it's highly complex, becomes divine in a sense.
It's a big extreme jump, though, to go from going into the crocodile's lair to the limpet. Was that a conscious thing to say, I want to take it now to the microcosmic level? I need to do this. That I feel that the crocodile's lair stuff, although yes, young men need to do this sort of thing, testing themselves. That's also part of our 3 million year old history too. But that's also ego. I mean, everybody does it. Presumably we're supposed to. Presumably we're wired to. You've got to steel yourself to put that spear into the bison at a certain point and know that it may well turn back and doof you. Okay. But that sounds like a conscious decision to go from the crocodile's lair to the limpet. Where was that decision made?
I mean, unconsciously it was made in the Pleistocene when I was your 25-year-old person in the Kalahari, when I saw and felt those incredible sand trackers able to speak with nature so fluently. And I also wanted to speak with nature like George does in the most profound way. And then I suddenly, years and years later, 20 odd years later, thought, okay, I'm stopping everything. I'm stopping filmmaking. I don't care about, just gonna, if I lose money or whatever, it doesn't matter. I have to be able to speak the language of nature, which is ultimately tracking. And I think George probably came onto that path a lot earlier than I did. I don't know what would your answer to that question? I'd be very curious to know, George.
Yeah, I think a lot like you, Craig. I proceeded with deeds, things, activities that I thought put me in the space to know. And I think when you first asked the question, Rupert, that's what initially came to my mind, is the love begins with the knowing. And the knowing can't take place without first noticing. And I hunted, and I fished, and I trapped. I did all kinds of things that I don't do now. They're part of my ancestry, and I still know how to do them. I do them in my dreams more than I can tell you. But they were all in an effort to, your kind of question there to Craig about when did you pick the limpets, and I kind of see that in myself, the choices, it's a deep-seated one as well, but it's just something on a continuum where subject matter doesn't matter anymore. The real goal is the relational tie in the desire to know another across the species boundary that sees and experiences this world in ways I never will. But like all relationships, they require time, and putting in that time, no matter what it is. For me, it was ravens when we first moved to Yellowstone. They taught me how to be a better person. They showed me things that no other human could show me. And to the apex experiences that come with that cultivation of knowing even very simple, by normal standards, simple creatures, stories and experiences I've had with butterflies and beetle larvae and bison and wolves and anybody, and I say anybody intentionally, that I've had the pleasure of spending time with, to really feel them. And it becomes emotional. And when something happens to them, I feel some piece of what they're feeling. It's welling up in me now. I was trying to finish a sculpture of this one alpha female wolf that I'd known since she was so young. And she went outside the park and got shot. Mm-hmm. I couldn't finish the sculpture. I got with her in front of me, as I often try to do. So I had to finish it from memory. But, whether it was mama deer here, is you open to noticing Just start there. So many people don't know or even begin on a path like Craig's or mine or yours, Rupert. It starts with just noticing. Don't do anything different than you already are right now, but just look in the grass before you get in the car. Look in the sky. What are the clouds like today? How many birds do you see? Let that be your stepping off point to begin to know, to see when something changes and it's different. And you find that with that time, that knowing soaks into you in that way our ancestors knew implicitly, that you are of this place. Yes, you're human, but you are not separate from this. You do not live just at an address. You live of this place. And you treat it differently as a result. You react differently. You experience more than you probably ever thought possible.
It sounds like, and I wonder if our 3 million-year-old ancestors went through this, and I need to go back and ask some of my friends in the Kalahari. But Craig, it sounds like you became brokenhearted somehow, even though you were so, living your life with indigenous people and nature. But of course, you were having to filmmake and, and sell those films internationally, and that's a hell of a business. And yes, it will exhaust you. But at the same time, you were doing it in these natural places with it, and yet you still became brokenhearted. And that, of course, cracked your heart wide open. George, have you become brokenhearted? And tell us about that.
I still am in ways. I think we all are. It's different shades of it. And it's sort of our burden to bear, but also our challenge to overcome by just not dwelling on that, but seeking those good things, those really beautiful things in life. Like Craig was saying, just how amazing we are as a species, like our senses and our ability to put two and two together and find relationships is unbelievable. And I think this comes from tracking not only the outside. A friend and I are having a very deep, extensive conversation on this that's lasted weeks, visiting every now and then and hitting this topic of tracking outwardly and inwardly. We deny the inward tracking so much that we do find ourselves brokenhearted and not knowing why.
Yes.
How the hell did I get here? I'm in here with these people, with these animals, and I feel like shit. What is that about? And so you start having to follow the bent grass and the pebbles kicked out of their places within your own heart and mind in ways that are not comfortable. I think that's keeps a lot of us from going there, as it to heal requires some pain. And in healing ourselves, the ancestors of my lineage who did the things they did to Native Americans, they were hurting themselves as much as they were hurting the people they were doing things to.
And they were coming out of a cycle of warfare back in Europe that was,
And me banging my head against a computer is doing harm to me that I need to repair. And boy, nature is one hell of a salve. It always has been, and it's there for free to all of us all the time. Right now. Stop. Put the video on pause and just go out for 5 minutes.
Do you hear that, listeners? Do it. Stop what, even though it's sacrilege to stop George Bumann and Craig Foster, and I think one gets fined for doing that, but nonetheless, stop it and do that. Go out and then go out for 5 minutes. and then cut and write down what you saw, and then click restart. You're probably going to listen to this in stages anyway because it's a couple of hours long. Yeah, I was just thinking, you could go through YouTube and look for morning rituals, all of which are great meditations on gratitude. I do think God wants us to appreciate and enjoy and be grateful for, but appreciate, not just not just thank you in that kind of cowed way, but no, really, thank you. This is incredible. God wants us to dance. God wants us to rejoice. This planet is so joyful. When one watches nature, one often seems to be observing it at play. And we know that we're very playful species. And it's interesting when I'm watching my horses, and my horses are probably my closest bond with nature, because they are family. We are a herd of human cross-species, human horse family, and have been for years. And some of my horses were born outside my back door, and used to come into the kitchen and get a beer out of the fridge. I'm not joking. And they carry me, and they carry autistic children out into the world, and they allow themselves to be interacted with, and they're okay being in service, but they're not in servitude. And one is fulfilling and one is crushing. And I think we've been in servitude as a species for a bit, that taming. And when you were saying, George, okay, here I am in this beautiful place among these amazing people, and there's a wolf over there, and there's this raven who's talking to me, and yet I feel like shit. It's almost like I feel that when you go into nature, it does, of course, bring to a head the infection that's inside from the last 10,000 years that is actually doing what it should do, which is coming to a head, a big pustule to be. There's lots of YouTube videos on that, and jolly satisfying they are to watch too. People getting botflies out of their hands and things. Watch 3 hours of that. But nonetheless, it's painful. And the pressure, the build-up of the pressure and so on, and it could kill you. Right? There is always that slight thing that it could, if the pressure builds up enough. And I know you've experienced this, Craig, in the Kalahari with the healers, that they experience death when they heal sometimes. And this happened when my son was healed. He's sleeping downstairs now. He just got off the plane, huge hulking guy now from Texas this morning here in Germany. And remember, wow, you were that little kid who was falling asleep in my arms at the trance fires in the Kalahari peacefully, while Nui and Unta, who were healing you, were going into the spirit world and suffering on your behalf. And Nui died. Oh, if you've seen that happen, Craig, yeah, where the healing energy becomes overwhelmingly strong because they're now facing something in the spirit world that's such a huge challenge that they have to deal with. And these are guys in their 70s, 80s, and they're dancing 12 hours. And then they have to attend to Nui to bring him back so that he can then continue. And then Unta takes on the and Rowan's just sleeping through all of this. But they're really expressing our need to come to a head and pop and burst, but then come back to homeostasis again, to harmony. And we see this all the time in nature, don't we? Volcanoes and weather systems and predator-prey relationships. But this deep brokenheartedness, I think everyone listening probably goes, yeah. What you just said, George, just start noticing. What you don't see on those like morning ritual videos is that. Get up out of bed. Don't worry about deep breathing. Don't worry about. Just go outside and look and write down what you see and observe. Do you feel better? Or do you feel worse? I think you two do it every day just because of where you live. I think back to the snail tracks on the eating the algae on the paving stones, it can be difficult when it's less obvious. And then it helps to have someone inspire you to begin to notice the limpet, the snail thing, the small stuff. As you said, George, the bent grass, the pebbles kicked. Who kicked them? What animal kicked them? Even if it was a human animal, what was the human animal story of that? So to heal this broken heart, you were talking, Craig, about the 1001 Species Project to make people fall back in love with nature. Do we need actually to fall in love with nature to fall back in love with ourselves?
I think it's a wonderful thing that you said there, because we are nature.
Yeah.
There's no separation.
Yeah.
So we do need to love nature to love ourselves. And our whole survival depends on the natural world. So if we don't love her, we don't fall in love with her again, well, almost certainly that'll be our demise. So it is to me, it's the most precious thing we'll ever encounter. It's our life support system. Everything we do depends on it. So nobody can convince me that there's anything more important than protecting our mother of mothers, our great mother nature. It's a foundation of every single aspect of our existence. And somehow we just need to realize that. And all of us have kind of somehow forgotten just how critical it is. So it is absolutely essential. And to realize there is no separation. And that's what's happening here in the little death that you're talking about in the Kalahari. You're dying, your ego is dying, and then you are merging with all that there is. And it's the same thing that needs to happen. We need to realize that we are inseparable from this extraordinary biological intelligence, not only on this planet, but extends into the deep cosmos. That is our, deep mother. So it's I think, an absolutely vital thing that we desperately need to change the story to be on that track.
We talk about the death of an ego, death of the ego. And because of ego's gone wild, gone nuts, maybe not gone unwild, egos now seem to cause great suffering to the point that we always seem to be trying to escape our ego or whatever. But that's impossible because it's part of nature now. It must be, or it wouldn't be in us. So it can't be bad. It's got to be there actually for a reason. It must have just gotten out of whack somehow. What do you think, George, in the natural, wild human context? What's the ego for? And both of you, what do you observe of ego in animals, in other species? Is it solely human? Or is it actually expressed everywhere? It's just that what is its purpose? What is the sane, natural, wild? What's the wild expression of the ego? What do you think, George?
Great question, Rupert. I think it does exist in other species. And like most things, there's a continuum of how that's expressed. And I think at the most basic level, ego expressed in nature is, I'm the best. You want to mate with me? Look how shiny my feathers are, right? Mm-hmm. I'm bigger, I'm stronger. It has a place to further the species, to further the strongest aspects of the species into the unknown of the future. And so there, I think it is a very useful tool to help life perpetuate itself. Where I think it goes wrong is when it's taken out of context. It's applied to everything, or in places that it isn't doesn't fit. And that's where we start running into trouble. You can see bull elk number 6 and his main adversary number 10 in Yellowstone, and vying for that one super harem of females and fighting it out a couple times a year, but during the breeding season, and showing off a whole bunch in between, and as a way to advertise to those females and intimidate your rivals. So that's where I think that's my initial snap response. Craig, do you have other thoughts on ego's role in nature?
Yeah, I think that it's not always so cut and dry. Sometimes it appears as if the biggest, strongest, and shiniest can win out, but that's often and sometimes not the case. But I think it's an amazing tool. It's a powerful thing. It's incredible for survival. It's absolutely necessary. But it has its place. And I think animals are very good at finding that balance, where we've just got it completely out of balance. And that's because our environment, and especially money, has turned us upside down with trying to deal with ego. So we've got an environment where it's very difficult to deal with it. And we need to really draw on our ancestral memory to find the appropriate place for it. So it's such a dangerous thing when it's out of control like it is now. But there isn't
Go ahead.
I was thinking of the story with wolves. The wolves that were actually meeker and more docile actually outwon the meaner wolves because people interacted with them. And am I right, George? There's some ideas around that the biggest, strongest, meanest ones didn't actually survive. It was the more social ones that did.
Yeah, some of Robert Sapolsky's research with baboons in Africa showed that very clearly, that they had a breakdown by virtue of disease, where this safari camp was throwing putrid meat out into the dump, and the most dominant males were eating the meat and soon died of disease. And you had this culture of male dominance and suppression through violence of other animals' behavior within the troop, turned over to, in essence, a matrilineal control of the community, and their selection was for males who were nice. Nature does that. It balances out it makes room for all the strategies, but it also makes room for the best strategies for that moment to come to the fore. And I think because of money in particular, David Graeber's last book, The Dawn of Everything, is this beautiful analysis of this kind of idea of mankind going from hunter-gatherer to metropolitan living, and the hunter-gatherer, agrarian pieces all in between. And one of the segments he highlights in there is the first initial contact in North America with Native Americans and Europeans, and some of the Native Americans going to Europe rather, and seeing just how horribly they treated the poor and the indigent, and literally laying in the streets, starving, injured, sick. That never happened in their culture. And Kondiaronk, one of the Native American emissaries who was part of one of those trips, said, "You've made a deal with the devil in the form of money. You would sell your mother, your daughter, for this surrogate to power, control, ego, whatever. I'm paraphrasing now, but that the world we've built around ourselves is not balanced in context to the natural order of things. So these terrible things happen much more readily." And that's one of the things I've found with just noticing and knowing and loving, whether it was the mule deer around the house or our magpies, who others despise because they eat other birds. But then they're being depredated by the ravens that are flying up and down the creek this morning. And you realize there's no good or bad. It's all in context. Yet when isolated and set aside from the natural order, some of these tendencies of any species can become malignant.
Right.
And I think we're dealing with that.
I'm thinking about.
Can I add to that, Rupert? Sorry.
Yeah.
I think what George has sparked for me, what is so apparent, and it's kind of obvious in a way, but when you're in these wild, near pristine places, and you just feel that incredible natural heartbeat everywhere, it's absolutely astonishing to one at that time that we've given up all of this magnificence for this weird substance we call money, and the power and that comes with it. But we've diminished our lives so much in that process. We naturally want like comfort, but there's a huge price to pay for that. Of course, one needs some level of comfort and security with, where you live and water supply and so on. But it needs to be balanced, and to give up these incredible natural systems for these levels of comfort is the worst deal that anybody has ever made. It's just, and it's so obvious when you're in those places. It's just, what the hell have we done? And this madness to levels of comfort actually create massive discomfort in the wild animal that we are.
Right. What I think you put your finger on there is suffering. And so and while you're talking about the, bull elk fighting or that sort of thing for the ego in the natural world, does the elk that loses the fight suffer psychologically? Or does it feel, is the fact that it's living in its correct context, in its correct environment, in its correct way, actually mitigate that suffering so that the ego can work to the degree that it needs to say, okay, fine, we'll have this DNA work in this way over here. But then, as you were also saying, in the context of those baboons, then the alpha males get too alpha male and end up dying off, and the females choose the nice ones. Is there suffering in the same way that we as humans in our non-wild context experience suffering? I would posit that I don't think so. When I, for example, when I observe my horses, they go through these ups and downs in the horse politic that they have, because they're an integrated herd and have been for years, and some were born into the herd, and so they really know each other. And my old horse Zag, who was very, very much the dominant horse for a long time, aged, and 2 years ago became not so much, unless he finds himself in the pen without the new dominant male, and then he kind of feels, okay, I kind of have to sort of assert myself again. But you can almost see him kind of go, and it's almost not an assertion, it's he then has to be the one that watches out for danger. He has to be the one that takes responsibility, and it's really exhausting for horses when they do that. So they'll often, in the daytime, because they have to remain vigilant at night for the other ones, they'll stretch out completely. It looks like they're dead, and actually it's hilarious. Sometimes people will call in the animal health department and say, I think there's a dead horse in the field. It happens like all the time. It's like, no, it's not a dead horse, it's a sleeping horse. And the non-dominant horses will actually stand watch for the sleeping supposed dominant horse, because they know that he's got to restore his energy to keep them safe. So it seems to be that there's this. And then, of course, this, Craig, among the Bushmen that we've spent so much time with, there's all these leveling, again, conflict resolution strategies. Like, if you are the alpha male and you are like the best hunter, your kill is not yours, because all the arrows are made by women and children in the village, and it's very, very clear whose arrow is whose, because they will put their signature on it somehow. And the other people in your hunting party will also know, because they'll see the arrow that you used if you made the kill, and they go, oh, that's Aunt Betty's. So when you're allowed to eat the liver, but you've got to take it back, and then you've got to give that carcass to Aunt Betty, and Aunt Betty will be the one that distributes it. And these are sort of 3 million-year-old human strategies for making sure that the ego can be used enough, but not too much. I would posit that plus the shamanic washing of the psychic dirty laundry every 10 days or so for we funky monkeys in those indigenous contexts mitigates that suffering, and then allows the ego to do its job, which is sometimes to make us go a bit beyond the energy level or the the comfort level perhaps that we would like to go to for the good of the survival of the group. Is money, where we call it money, but I feel that money is neutral unless we can give it power either way. But is it what we're really looking at is fragmentation and the idea of just turning inward on the self? I'm no longer working for the good of the group. I'm now working, the group is only me, even though I'm part of a group. And is that when we actually then suffer from our egos, and that's when the ego becomes unwilded? Is that it?
If you made it this far into the podcast, then I'm guessing you're somebody that, like me, loves to read books about not just how people have achieved self-actualization, but particularly about the relationship with nature, spirituality, life, the universe, and everything. And I'd like to draw your attention to my books. If you would like to read the story of how we even arrived here, perhaps you'd like to check out the 2 New York Times bestsellers, The Horse Boy and The Long Ride Home, and come on an adventure with us and see what engendered, what started Live Free, Ride Free. And before we go back to the podcast, also check out The Healing Land, which tells the story of my years spent in the Kalahari with the Sun, Bushmen, hunter-gatherer people there, and all that they taught me and mentored me in, and all that I learned. Come on that adventure with me.
That's the ultimate suffering, is when that loss of belonging. I don't think there's
Belonging, right?
the greatest suffering, because a social animal, a tribal creature like us, the scariest, most terrifying thing is being ousted and being alone. That's the worst punishment. And that's the punishment now that we've thwarted upon ourselves. We are, we're out of this cycle of all these other divine beings that we've lived with from the beginning. And it's very, very painful.
Greed doesn't make you a good neighbor or friend or family member. We could replace the word money, and we probably should, with greed. How much
And it
do
could
you
be
need?
greed for anything, right? It could be greed for other people's energy, other people's attention,
food, certain type of clothing, picket,
validation,
prestige, recognition.
prestige.
And
Prestige.
in our wild condition, I think you two have experienced it firsthand, that there is a continual check on that sort of stuff for the good of the group. We don't depend on the group in the way the wolves do here in Yellowstone that I watch. And when there's a conflict, they bite that yearling and pin it to the ground and then move on. Everybody moves on. It's done. It's over. The point was made. Eckhart Tolle writes about it in the form of ducks. Ducks have a squabble in a pond, but then after that they go on. They aren't spinning in the pond, thinking, "Why the hell did that son of a bitch do that? I can't believe he did that." This is the mind spinning of a caged animal. We've put ourselves in that mind cage where we do that stuff. And that's not how nature works. Nature has its off-ramps to tension in a group, has its off-ramps to greed and jealousy and the desire to hoard things. It just, especially if you're a social animal, there is not room for you to do things your way all the time exactly the way you want. If you do, you die, or you're excommunicated. You're ousted from your group. If the species behaves that way in its broader community, it dies. And right now, that's what we're doing. We are behaving as if our agenda is all that matters. And this comes with a rub. It might, in our case, for most people, because of that comfort Craig refers to, that comfort, that rub is not felt as much. But spring's coming a little earlier here to Yellowstone country.
Yeah.
Our tanagers, Western tanagers, just showed up, and they're 2 weeks late. Why? Was there just a weather system? But is that weather system something that's been driven by the warming of the climate? Is there something happening in Costa Rica where they winter that's prevented them from having the resources to come back to North America as they always do, usually in the mid to third week of May? This rub it's building. And before long, the comfort walls that we've built around ourselves, they already aren't enough to keep the impacts from being felt. But unless we begin to know and to feel and to love better on a daily basis as part of our typical MO, the ship's going down. And that's a very pessimistic way to look at it.
We're saying that, they're building like more Dubais. You ever been to Dubai? I don't want to go to Dubai, I suspect eventually I'll find myself there somehow, for some reason. Terrifies me, this idea that you can build these things in places where people are not supposed to live like that in these ways, and just say, no, we can just create all this artificiality for comfort. But I think you put your finger on it. We said prestige. It's this desire for prestige where it goes wrong. But we're told that's what we needed. I mean, when I was at school, in that same school that had the chapel that said God is love and love is God, we were also told you must be in competition with each other. It was instilled into us. I know the school you went to. I know you went to Bishop's in Cape Town. My cousin Simon went there. Craig, yeah, I know they would have told you the same thing, and the sports we played, the way we interacted with each other, the bullying that went on psychologically and physically, it was all about prestige. But everyone in any level of our society is experiencing that at any time. Both of you, though, have said, and I think this is what sometimes gets forgotten in conversations like this. I wrote this word from both of you, which I've heard you say several times in this conversation and in other conversations, and I think it's the way out. You talked about that. It's a brilliant thing. You talked about nature has its off ramps, George. Brilliant. To the negative. Where do those off ramps start? Where does the healing start? Where does the conflict resolution start? I think you both made the point. I've drawn a box around this word, and the word is notice. The moment you start to notice nature, you're outside of yourself. You have perspective of yourself. Prestige falls away. It's the immediate antidote. It's the immediate panacea. Even when it's worrying, as you say, why are the tanagers late? I talked about that hunting story in that same 3 days of hunting where I was noticing the megaliths and the human story and the human wolf pack that we were, and then now the wolves coming back. There were these yellow butterflies appearing in February in the clearings of the woods that should not be there in northern Germany in February. And as we paused, letting the horses breathe and letting the hounds cool off and have water because it was unseasonably warm. Beautiful, beautiful yellow butterflies drifting through the clearing. But they shouldn't be there. But the very noticing of them assuaged my pain of worrying about climate. Okay, I'm worried about it's getting warmer, but these butterflies are very beautiful, and the planet will be fine, even if we make it not fine for ourselves. It will. But that would be sad, because as you say, we're creatures of love. But this word notice, notice, notice. It seems that what you do is you notice things, and you show other people how to notice things. And in your showing of other people how to notice things, you help them to rewild. And if you help them to rewild, you help them to heal. Is noticing really where it needs to start for everyone? That simple act.
Noticing, I think, is the fundamental essence of tracking. High level noticing. And tracking is the oldest language on earth. Tracking is our way of connecting and belonging and feeling part of this incredible ecosystem. So you've hit it absolutely, spot on. Noticing at a high level and taking notice is critical for this conversation and this changing of the story that will, determine our future.
George?
I concur. Just by noticing, your internal chemistry is already shifting. Did you notice what so-and-so did when you said that? It's sometimes a hard pill to swallow, but it's a beautiful gift. And out of those gifts...
we have to notice each other too. It's so true.
Yeah.
Because we are nature. It's not just noticing the nature around us.
Right. It's all the same. It's all one.
Oh my God, that's so tricky.
As a good friend said, he had a tracking mentor who spent his career tracking mostly illegal immigrants on borders, but a lot of lost individuals and criminals, and just very high level tracking in the context of the non-survival world. But in his little note to my friend in the book he'd given him, he said that tracker will never be limited by what can be found on the ground or in nature. It'll only be limited by the mind of the tracker.
Beautiful.
Yeah. It's there. Every single step of the way is there if we are of the mindset to search for it and to see it and to understand what that means for us.
And in order to notice each other in this way, so that we can not make each other and therefore the planet suffer and ourselves, does it start though with noticing what is outside of ourselves? Because if we can do that, if we can track what is outside of us in nature, or appears to be outside of us in nature, is that our first step to being able to notice the effect of what I said on my wife, or the effect of what I said on my kid, or the effect of my mood today on my horse? Does it start with noticing the cloud, with noticing the bit of grass around the tree that's growing out of the sidewalk of the house that you live on, where the dogs poop? But is there life in there, and what life is there, and what life is in that tree? What tree is it? Does it still always... I kind of think it does have to be that there has to be that external tracking that allows the internal tracking to begin. And I think you guys help people with that. I think you assuage suffering. You studies are now being done on the effect on the mind and the endocrine system in the human on, say, watching nature documentaries. And it's very, very good for us. It's got to be done. Someone's got to go out there, film that thing, and bring it in and show it. if we're not in it. George, when you're creating the art that you create and bringing the stories that you create, you actually got to go out there and do that. Create that piece of art, even if it's an image of that art. It assuages suffering because you bring the nature in, but you had to go out and notice it first in order to do that. There's something I'd like to ask you as we sort of approach probably towards the conclusion of where we are, this conversation. We've talked about deep wild places. The kelp forest, even though it's very, very close to Cape Town, is a deeply wild, seemingly quite intact ecosystem. Yellowstone National Park, the same. And these forests in Germany where I live, even though they're worked forests, they still maintain an awful lot of life. And I'm lucky to spend time in them. Do you have places that you know? What are your favorite places? Maybe 2 or 3 that you can tell listeners that are actually in or really, really close to really shit environments that we don't have to go as far as Yellowstone. We don't have to get on a plane to Cape Town. Think of cities that you know that are kind of crap and places that you found in or close to them. Not 3,000 miles off the coast of Africa.
What comes to mind was when I did this book tour and had such a great time meeting George and some other special people. I was in this place near Miami doing one of these talks, and it was not easy for me to be on a book tour and to be in aeroplanes and traveling and big cities and press. And doesn't come naturally to me at all. And I remember walking along this road, and it wasn't that far from Miami. And it was right near where these massive aeroplanes were taking off. And I managed to get off this sort of highway, and the ocean was coming into this shallow area, and the tide was coming up. And I just needed some nature time. And I lay in this very shallow water. And every now and again, this massive aeroplane would come over my head, and the whole ground and everything would shake. And it was incredible. The animals there were quite used to it, and they didn't even bat an eyelid. And I found these beautiful, beautiful crustaceans, these shrimps, living in beer bottles. It was like a perfect home for them. And it was just, and then there were these fish that came in, and then I noticed these incredible, what looked like decorator crabs, and then with molla. I was just lying still in this very shallow, very warm water, and these massive aeroplanes coming over. And yet these animals were there living in these beer bottles and this life. I saw some extraordinary creatures, and it was just like almost more powerful. So it's a funny thing when you find these creatures in these funny little places, in these areas where there's so much human dominance. It can be very powerful and emotional. And you think, this is a miracle. How these things... And there were horseshoe crabs there as well. I saw these horseshoe crabs like in these ancient creatures moving, but I'm keeping dead still. So everything just sort of, was okay with me being in that space. And then every now and again, this aeroplane would come over and everything would just shake. And it was, I think that you can find these little pockets of life, and it's very, very powerful. More surprising than, finding something in the middle of a wild place, and a very wild place in many ways.
Yeah. The dump.
Go on.
I spend more time at the dump probably observing ravens than sometimes than I do anywhere else. Right? You so social of a creature and so many nuances to their behaviors and their calls and their relationship to us, concentrated in that one spot that is just the last place most people would ever want to spend any amount of time. Dump your trash and get the hell out of there. And the dump is, I almost lamented a little bit when they put in a compactor unit. So not all the trash was in these open dumpsters because it offered a lot more food and there were a lot more ravens, and now it's more sparse. But that gift of seeing an animal make its way in a landscape that we've engineered around our preferences and what suits us. And it's just the most tragic thing for these creatures to be referred to as vermin or dumpster chickens. I heard ravens called too before, and like, yeah, but is this not amazing that this creature that we thought lived on the edge of this most amazing wilderness, and none of them are living purely off the wilderness land. They're flying 20, 30 miles daily one way to take advantage of what we throw away.
Mm.
And then they fly that 20, 30 miles home to defend their territory until the next day when they fly. And this idea that this bird I'm seeing right here on the edge of the dumpster watching me get rid of my recycling and my refuse has commuted here to be in this spot right now. It has a story. It has a family. It has, these life experiences that I can't possibly imagine. And yet we get to interface a little bit right here at the dump for a few minutes. And I just love that idea of these strings of connectivity to, yes, some of these pristine places, but also some of these most unlikely places. And it takes all of it for this to exist.
Well, I think the point that you're both making there is that what reminds us, the noticing, what reminds us of our connection with nature is when we see nature interact with us. You can go to Yellowstone and think, well, I'm kind of looking at a living museum here, or the Serengeti, but I am not part of this. I've flown here in a plane, I've gone on safari. But I think when you go to these liminal places, the edges of cities, the edges of industrial complexes, and you see the coyote hunting, along the edge of the polluted, swampy thing in New Jersey, or, as you come into Newark Airport. And it's often those places, transportation hubs, industrial places where people don't actually want to live. That's of course where the animals come in and live, isn't it? I would think about being in airplanes. I flew to London recently, and we're coming down over it. We're coming down, and I'm looking at London. I'm looking at just how many big green spaces there are in that city. Huge. And the one I know best is Hampstead Heath, which is very central, and it's about 1,000 acres of ancient woodland. Huge oaks that are in the upper, hundreds of years old, some of them pushing 1,000 years old. And then the plane flew to go into Heathrow, which is on the west side, but had gone over the east side, which is the docks and the old, industrial areas. And there's the Lee Valley coming down, and the River Lee, with all these beautiful wetlands on it. They've reintroduced beavers there to control flooding because of climate change. And then the plane swung to the west, and I looked down and I said, oh, that's Richmond Park and Bushy Park, these old hunting forests that were there because there were huge populations of red deer, which are still there. And I looked down and I saw this big herd of red deer just moving across this big open glade, but all the buildings, off over there and so on, rising. Yeah, you can access any of those green spaces, those natural spaces. And as you say, from living in the middle of the city, and as you say, these interactions, these snails in the bottles and the crabs and the fish with the plane coming over, or the dump where you actually get to interact with the raven because you're both there more or less for the same reason. And where we think when we're destroying nature, these industrial sites, these liminal sites, often that seems to be where nature finds its first foothold. Is it the noticing of that in those places that actually has the most power for us, because it serves as a metaphor for that? Yeah, we can rewild. If it's always got to be Yellowstone or Mongolia, well, we might see that as very separate from ourselves.
I see them as infinitely more important than a Yellowstone and the Kalahari and the Schwarzwald or the kelp forest in the societal sense.
Yeah.
To me, you cannot sensitize yourself to, let's say you do go to one of those places on a bucket list trip, you will miss so much if you've not been doing your homework at home.
Locally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I had a friend who went to Zambia. She'd never been there. Total bucket list trip. Wanted to see painted dogs so badly. It hurt. And they went day after day and couldn't find any. And they're going along and they're in the landy, and the guide's in the front in the seat. And she's in the, toward the back. She says, could they be over there? And the guy turns and looks at her, and then he looks off, and they're over there. Looks back at, how did you know that? Well, I don't know, but those birds over there were kind of doing what the birds in my yard do when the neighbor's dog's out. These lessons transfer, and if you're already practiced in your own local language arts version of nature's conversations, the ability to notice and discover goes way, way up. So as nice as it is to go to Yellowstone and see a wolf or something like that, actually I get as excited or more excited when I see the equivalent in a suburb, visiting my brother-in-law, and there's just this, for me, I can't imagine living there. There's housing development and tract after tract of the same house built over and over on these loops. And, there's it's called 7 trails, and there's not a single trail among any of them.
Well, they usually, I've noticed in America, name those housing developments after the thing that they destroyed to make it,
absolutely
crossing.
Absolutely.
It's like the fox that used to cross here before we built this thing.
Totally. It's so bad, and it's so true. But even in the context of that, I could know that woman who's walking her dog is coming before she ever gets there through what the birds are doing between the houses and that one feeder. I know that there's a Cooper's hawk coming, probably from that direction. You cannot get what there is to receive from nature if you're not paying attention to what's closest to you on a daily basis. Those animals in your neighborhood are your very best teachers, your best guides, your best mentors. I don't know. How do you feel on that, Craig?
No, absolutely. I mean, I think you said it so beautifully. These creatures are really, certainly for me, my finest teachers. Especially for me, the underwater creatures. But it's a place that I do visit every day. But it's the daily interaction and that familiarity with the wild language that is absolutely critical. It's much better to go to a local place that's very close, that has just a few animals, than go to these bucket list places where it's just a passing cloud.
All right, so what are we going to conclude this with? I'll tell you where I'm going to go. I'm going to go notice. So I need to take my dog, Axel, one of my 2 dogs, my high maintenance Doberman, who we rescued in Texas. He spent his first 2 years in a cage and is neurotic to all sorts of degrees, but very sweet. And I live in fear of his bottom, because if you don't empty it, this is a relationship with that. If you don't make sure to empty that bottom, before 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock at night. It's going to empty itself, not where you want to empty it. And we actually take bets, my son and I, how many poos it will be on a given night. And it will depend on how much horse poop has been eaten earlier in the day and such and such. So it can go as much as 6. It could be as little as 1, but it's usually you're safe with 3 or 4. And whoever bets 3 or 4 first usually will win. So, it adds a sporting element. But what there is down in the Autal, which is where the park I'm going to walk him in. Au is an old German word for water meadow, an Au, A-U. And you'll often see that, Aubach, Autal, that in people's names as well. And the Tal just means a valley, like a small valley. And that on top is where that wolf was the other day, but it's here, it's in the village. And, but it's very much sort of a park. But it's June. And I know that if I go down there now at 9-ish, now, just as it gets dark, the fireflies will be out. I'm going to go and notice the fireflies. First, I'm going to notice if they're there, because I haven't been able to get out, and sometimes I think now is the time. Sometimes I hit it just right, sometimes I don't. So are they still there, and where are they, and are there more or less than they were? And I'm going to notice how they make me feel, because fireflies always make me feel transported. So that's the noticing in my hood that I'm going to do now while I go and empty my dog's bottom. By the way, you're welcome to lay bets, and I'll be a gentleman. I won't pick 4 or 3. You guys can have that. So whoever does that and you get it right, I owe you €1. Okay, so don't know if do you want to take a bet on it, George? Pick a number.
Boy.
Check in with your gut, your intuition, your hunters, trackers, mind, interspecies.
I'm feeling
mind.
4 to 5,
4.
but a little closer to 4.
Okay, George is 4. Craig?
I'll go for 2.
Woo, living dangerously.
Yeah.
But you could well be right. A seasoned tracker amongst us has spoken. So, okay. Gives me pause. So that means I've got to go for 3 or 5.
Yeah, you got to report back now.
I'm going to go for 3. All right. But I will honor the bet. All right. But what local noticing are you going to do now when we close this conversation? Craig, where are you going to go?
I go to bed quite early and get up very early. I will be going probably into the water quite early tomorrow morning. There's a very interesting big octopus that is getting quite comfortable with me and allowed me to film it walking bipedally, and also was actually feasting on a small shark recently, which is very unusual.
When you say it allowed you to film it walking bipedally, is that a behavior that they're normally very shy about? Because
well, you have to get very close and look underneath the web, because otherwise you can't see the arms that have changed into legs. Okay. So it will only allow you if it is not threatened. So it's got it. They quickly realize who you are. They know you as an individual. You're not harming them anyway. So it's a big, large, quite confident animal. So I'll be going to look for that wonderful octopus in the morning.
Wow.
And notice whatever she's got to teach me.
George, where are you going to go?
Sounds great. Well, I haven't stopped. I don't know if you've noticed my eyes darting hither and yon. We had an elk walk through, and the magpies are I think they may be making a false nest in the spruce tree right outside the window here.
Why are they making a false nest? What's a false nest?
They're tricky buggers, they are.
But why do they make false nests?
I think to lead the nest predators astray.
Okay.
They will create multiple nests that they seem to be active in, and yet only lay eggs in one of them. And they've actually been known to move their eggs between nests as well if there's trouble. And maybe just for fun, I don't know. No one's interviewed a magpie to see. But they just erupted here in a big fit of chatter, which makes me wonder if the raven is giving them difficulty again. So my dog needs to go out. He's been moaning here for the last minute or 2, and we may go check the magpies. The one is going into the nest right now. I'm curious if the ravens are out So many of our adventures start this way. We'll be laying in bed and we can hear something through the window and skip breakfast and run out to see what the heck's going on there. And so it's midday here in the United States, so I'll probably go out, might sit down and either on the porch or in a little patch of cottonwoods, literally right off the corner of the house, we call the Tree Palace. I've got names for all of the places that we've given them, so no one else knows these names, but we know it immediately in the family when someone says the Winnie the Pooh forest or the Sitting Rock, or
that is a really that thing of intimacy with the landscape where you begin to name it.
Yeah.
Even though of course it has its own language as independent from us, but that's a language of love, isn't it? When you begin to name certain rocks, certain trees, certain yeah,
they're terms of endearment, for sure, and they're part of our own story of healing and just living here. So I'm going to go sit in the Tree Palace and see what the magpies are talking about.
All right. I guess we should go do that. I'll go get Axel. He's revving up his bottom. And hopefully the fireflies will add the sublime to his fertilizing of the plants on which the fireflies dance. Craig, your octopus, please greet her from me and tell her how grateful I am to her and her kind for letting you film the film that you made, which I think did create your charity Sea Change. I think my Octopus Teacher did create a sea change actually in people's perception of nature through media. I really do. But the octopus had to allow itself to be filmed that way. So please thank her on my behalf. George, the magpies. I love magpies. And they have a nest right outside this window here too. And now you've said false nest. I didn't know this about them. And I've wondered why they seem to spend so much time there, but there don't seem to be any eggs. So now I'm wondering if that's why.
Put on a monkey suit and peek in the nest, because if they see you going into the nest, they'll hassle you from here on ever forward. So put on a disguise, check the nest, and then take off the disguise.
I'm going to disguise myself as George Bumann, I think. Yeah. go talk to him. Yeah.
I visited Rupert and these birds are attacking me. What's going on here? Just rabble rousers. No. You've just trained them. This has been a pleasure. It's such a joy to share this with you.
It's
both.
such a privilege to be able to have conversations like this about topics like this with people that you love and respect. So my utter gratitude to you guys for the work.
Thanks so much for all your effort in doing this, Rupert, and keeping going, and your energy and everything. So really, and your way with this. Thank you so much.
And hopefully we can do this again.
That'd be wonderful.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, lads. I'm going to click
Bless
that.
you guys. Bless you guys.
Bless you.
I made this one today, George. I don't know if you can see.
Oh, look at that.
Whoa.
Oh, I don't have yours to show me, but I drilled a hole in yours, and I'm making a necklace to put it on.
Somebody could take that out of context, George.
We're among friends. We're among friends. No,
What is
but
that?
that's beautiful. That's so
What
beautiful.
is that?
This is a seed that's come down from Mozambique.
Okay.
It's a Zulu love bean. It's like a lucky seed. And then I've just engraved this. I don't know if you can see that kind of shamanic octopus on there. I don't know if you can. It catches the light. Yeah. So it comes in on the ocean.
All right, guys. Craig, I know you need to go to bed. Get up early for your octopus. My dog's bottom.
Bless you guys. Lots of love. Lots of love. Bless you.
Back at
You
you.
too.
We'll be in touch.
Yes.
Thank
Till
you.
next time.
Okay, wonderful. Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Guys. Bye.
Cheers.
I hope you enjoyed today's conversation as much as I did. If you did, please help us to make more. Please like, subscribe, tell a friend, give us a thumbs up. If you'd like to support us on Patreon, please go to my website, rupertisaacson.com. And if you'd like to find out about our certification courses with autism, education, horsemanship, everyday shamanism, there's a whole range of cool stuff. Putting a show together like this is not an easy task. If you'd like to support us, please consider going to our Patreon page and showing us some love there. Even the smallest donation, it really helps us to keep the good content coming. So go to rupertisaacson.com and click on the Patreon link. Not to mention our excellent merch. Please go to our shop and check out some of our really cool rock and roll themed merch, t-shirts, hoodies, all that sort of thing. rupertisaacson.com, it's all there. I can't wait for our next guest and also to meet you there. In the meantime, remember, live free, ride free.